Alright gang, today's video, it's gonna be a little different than it normally is. Normally I would provide some kind of gameplay and stuff, but I'll go over why I'm not providing gameplay and what you can look forward to tomorrow. So starting off, this is Dark Masters. That's right, she's back. Alright, my pet deck, the one, the only. Last format, a little rough for her. The format beforehand, not even fantastic, but just completely okay for her. This format, we're back in the okay position, boys. I'm not going to sell you on something crazy. I'm not going to say this is the best deck in the format by any means, but I also haven't tested it that much yet. So, when I get that testing done, maybe this will be the sleeper best deck post-ban list. So, let's look forward to that. I'll go into the list here, talk about the changes, and then I also have another section about the cards that I considered but haven't put in. In the comments, if you see anything, have any questions, or have any ideas on cards that I should have in here, cards that I mentioned but you don't know why necessarily they're in here, or ideas for the deck, please comment below. I'd love to hear more. I love this deck. And this is one of my favorite decks I have played in the game, and I'm super excited to be able to play it effectively going forward. So, why is this deck good right now, in my opinion? Well, if you guys are following the channel and looking at kind of what's going on, in my opinion with the meta, I think that Daruga, Imperial, Ancient Gurumon are the three best decks in the format. There are some other contenders out there as well, like Demon Lords and Mirage, that I think a lot of people are really looking into. For me personally, I think the sleeper pick in the format right now is for sure Demon Lords, and I think that coming up soon at the newest Ultimate Cup that is coming up, or the regionals that is coming up, I believe this weekend, I would not be surprised if we see Demon Lords take a decent percentage. However, this deck also I think has a wonderful time against the other three best decks in the format. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Marshmallow, you've talked before about how this is like a very board-centric tempo-based deck, and all those decks are really good at dealing with that kind of playstyle. Correct. Which is why it wasn't really in a good state prior to EX7 coming out. But post EX7, we actually get a nice little piece of support that we can just slot into our deck without having to make almost like any concessions whatsoever with having to play extra cards in order to support it, because we already played the package supporting it, which is Shoto. Because of the fact we played Mother D Reaper, we can actually play a more in-the-back breaching-centric playstyle, promote one of our Dark Masters, maybe get some value out of it with a swing. But more importantly, we're actually even more gung-ho on the Omnizort game plan. We're more than likely going to be deleting our own level 5s pretty consistently until we can get a big Omnizort swing turn. And the cards that let us survive up until that point are the Mother D Reaper and the Shoto, because of the fact that Enga, without the Koji that prevents redirection, the Daruga without a decent alliance target, and Imperial all don't have great ways to deal with Shoto Mother D Reaper. So, that's the theory behind the list. And you all will be able to see me tomorrow, Wednesday, 5 p.m. EST, participate in a decently sized tournament using EX7 proxies, where I will be playing this list. Now, going over the card by card, starting off, we'll go ahead and just do the two mainline Dark Masters supporting cards. I've played with ratios of 4 and 3 before. I think 4 and 4 is super mandatory in this list for a couple of reasons. One, you really need to see one of those. And because we're playing less copies of Analog Youth in this list, you're less likely to be able to just search them out. As well as they're very important for finding your Zwart, which is such a key piece for the deck currently. As well as finding one of your purple or black Dark Masters. That it's, I think, important to see 1 to 2 copies of these in your opening hand for sure. Onto the other level 5 that is Dark Master support is Mephistomon. This card is insanely good, but not for the reason I think they intended when it comes to printing. If you delete this Digimon, on deletion you can play out a Dark Masters from your hand or trash for free. The idea behind it, at least from what I can gather, is you would use one of your other level 5s, get the search, and then on the next turn, you'd play out the Mephisto, activates the level 5 to delete the Mephisto, place a Dark Masters in the back, as well as recycle a Dark Masters from the trash, getting a little bit of extra tempo and pressure on your opponent. Absolutely not. This guy is invaluable for a different reason, which is he can't be deleted. If your opponent deletes him, and you have anything threatening in trash, like a metal, like a machine, or a pied, they can't delete him unless they play around it. But even if they play around, let's say I have a machine in trash, currently waiting, if my opponent can play around the machine, like they just hard play a really big body, and then use an ace effect to delete the Mephisto by like hard playing like an Angemon or an Angelwoman for like the 4, deleting the Mephisto, I can just play the Piedmon from hand, immediately popping their ace and then stealing an extra 3 memory, making them just do a 7 mana turn to essentially do nothing besides rip a card from my hand, because of the fact that Piedmon would then delete itself. But if I have another Dark Masters in play, that's even more value you can get on top of that, depending what their board state is or depending what Dark Masters I have in hand, which is fantastic. It's truly, truly wonderful. And if they choose to ignore it, well, we're still playing some, 4 specifically, decent purple aces. Obviously, I feel like the purple ace pool is a little lacking at the moment. However, Melga is still wonderful for combo potential, as well as it's a great way to deal with certain bodies that we really have difficulties dealing with, such as like Magna X being unaffected. Most of our aces won't be able to deal with that, unfortunately. We only have really one ace that can, which is the Imperial, which we'll go over in a second. But being able to still turn from the Magna X player, preventing them from getting full value out of their unaffected body, is fantastic. And so I think this card is really, really good. Unfortunately, it is bricky. It doesn't search at all. It also costs an obscene amount at 8. You can reduce the play cost by 3 down to 5 if you bottom deck one of your Apocalypse from trash, which works pretty well at recycling your Apocalypse. Sometimes you don't mind having it in trash though, because it is a white level 7, but I mean you have so many other white level 7s in your deck that typically you'll be fine. Even bottom decking the Apocalypse, and even though it is bottom deck, you search so much in the deck that you will realistically see it against any like slower controller variant, or even if you start taking the game to a longer point, which you probably will end up doing against a majority of decks, unless they can rush you down, which is harder for them to do with the Shoto Melody Reaper combo. But again, getting ahead of myself, we'll get there. On to the last searching non-archetypal level 5, we're playing 3 Wisemon. So this Wisemon reveals top 3, adds a purple or black Digimon to your hand, and then you can place the remaining cards on top or bottom of your deck in any order. Really good for cycling for Shoto. Even though you can't search the Shoto, you can look at your top 3. If you find it, you can just place it right back on top, which is fantastic for making sure that you get it on the next turn. It is great for finding your other level 5s here, your Eramons, your Gigadras, and your Lady Debbys. But it also has a very important trait about it, being that it has the inheritable blocker and is purple and black, meaning every single one of your aces now gains blocker. All your Vikemons, your Genkuagas, and your Metalgras are all blockers now when on top of your Wisemon. This is usually the card you kind of want to play out off of your Zort if you don't have a great target for Ede, or if you don't need a Dark Masters level 5 in rotation to start the Dark Masters cycle up again. It is super, super good. Unfortunately, it is a bit slower than I would like in the current format, and because it can't remove itself from field by itself, I only played it at 3 copies. It's still fantastic against a lot of matchups. There are just certain matchups where playing this guy out usually will just give your opponent free value, specifically talking about the Dexterugumon matchup and the Angshinkarurumon matchup. Both of those are a little bit rough when it comes to Wisemon, but other than those 2 matchups specifically, he's fantastic everywhere else. Speaking of a card that's fantastic in most places but has a couple of key rough matchups, Edamon. Edamon is wonderful against armor, he's wonderful against Imperial, he's wonderful against just even Dexteruga in a lot of ways. Just being able to give something -3k start your main phase that has to attack. There's so many things that you can do taking advantage of that. However, there are certain matchups where it really is just slightly unfortunate, such as like Demon Lords, not being able to get them to swing. He's kind of just a dead card in hand. Against Magna Yellow Vaccine, they're playing new tech with like Nyaromon, meaning that whenever they swing, they can trash the top card immediately, so that way they activate the unaffected version of the effect, gain a memory, and unsuspend, essentially getting maximum value of their Magna without having any of the risks, which is a pretty tough matchup that we would normally have to rely on Edamon for, but in that matchup we unfortunately can't unless they end up misplaying. Nonetheless, I think Edamon is strong enough that I want to see him multiple times in multiple games. Unfortunately, the deck list is extremely tight right now. The only card that I could justify cutting would probably be a copy of Grand Kawagamon or both of the analog use to add in 2-to-1, 1 or 2 Valkyrie Aces, which Edamon absolutely loves as a card. Being able to give minus 8k to something specific and then minus 5k to your opponent's board is wonderful for stopping aggression as well as destroying any of your opponent's tempo. I've made the concession, just due to the fact that we're playing so many Shotos, that we can kind of handle some amount of aggression already, and I don't necessarily feel like we need those Valkyriemon Aces, but depending on what I see in tomorrow's tournament, maybe I will end up adding 1 to 2 more copies of Valkyriemon Aces, even though it may hurt some of our draw power or consistency, or even hurt some of our purple top end, making it so that way our Aces are less scary for purple. But we'll see. And that's it for the level 5s, 16 of them, pretty hefty chunk of the deck. Key takeaways here. Super good to find at least 1 copy of the in-archetype level 5s. The Wisemon is fantastic in a majority of matchups. The Edamon is wonderful when it comes to fighting for tempo, as well as for punishing overextension from your opponent. And then Mephistomon is a great body to kind of just sit on as a way of saying, hey, try me. Moving on to the majority of the deck being the level 6s, we're playing 21 level 6s, starting with the in-archetype cards. We're playing 4 Machine, 4 Pi, and 3 Metal Seedramon. I've been over these cards a lot, so if you want to know what they explicitly do, you can go listen to one of my prior videos about the deck. They have not changed. But key takeaways to note is that I'm not playing any Puppetmon, and I'll get over to that whenever we talk about this side of the list here. But I am playing 3 Metal Seedramon. Well, similar to how important Wisemon is, this guy gives blocker to whatever's underneath it, and surprisingly enough, having a 16k of blocker that has upside and then threatens lethal on the crackback is really good. It's really, really good. That's unironically the main reason why we're playing 3 metal. I was playing 1 puppet in the list, but I ended up cutting it for the 3rd metal here, just because I really think it's invaluable to have blocker available for your Imperial Dramons. Other than that, they do what they do. They're Dark Master support, they're black and purple for a reason, and this guy just provides blocker. That's the main gimmick of them. The other upsides are there, and then like cherries on top for what they're actually able to do. Moving on to the Aces, we'll start with the purple Aces because they're the smaller amount. We've got 2 Grand Kawagamon Aces. These are the cards that you kind of want to see in the Imperial matchup, just because you can hard play it for 7 after your opponent plays a Cannon Davis for 4, delete the Cannon Davis, and really stopping a lot of the tempo and value they'll be getting from those cards, which is truly fantastic. The power they have in a lot of the other matchups, though, is a little dwindling. An upside to this card, though, is the fact that it is green, so that means Imperial can, in fact, ace on top of it. So you can ace Grand Kawaga on top of one of your purple level 5s here. Suspend 2 of your opponent's Digimon, and then maybe delete your Tamer if they have one. And if they swing in again, you can go straight into a Paladin mode, which is truly fantastic, because you can get a Wisemon underneath it as such, and that'll give it blocker, which feels great. Also, it has some aggression in it, being the security attack +1 whenever it suspends during your turn, allowing you to give one of your multi-attackers, like the Mega Gargo or the Imperial Dramon, a little bit extra oomph, allowing them to check for 4 instead of just for 2, which is, again, fantastic. So in total, it'd be 5 checks with these 2 Digimon on board. Super, super threatening. And then onto the Metal Garurumon. This card's just great for stealing turn from your opponent, setting up your trash a little bit better, because you truly want 2 copies of your level 5s in the trash at any given time, just to make optimal use of your Omnimon Zort. As well as it is a combo card that lets you go into Omnimon Zort on your turn from just having a level 5 in play if your opponent was able to out it after your first turn, which is also super invaluable. Moving on to the black Aces, we've got 4 Vikemon and 2 Mega Gargomon. Mega Gargomon is, I think, super impactful in this current meta, just because it interacts very interestingly against decks like Dex Daruga, where if they swing into you and attempt to activate like their collision stuff, you can ace their Digimon and suspend it, but more importantly prevent it from digivolving, so that way when they crash into you and they would be deleted, they actually can't digivolve from trash, preventing them from getting any protections whatsoever, which is fantastic. It can also be used on your turn as a way of stopping your opponent's Paildramon from being able to interact with your board by going into a dragon mode, or even going into a fighter mode or a Paladin mode on their turn, which is really nice as a defensive play. Unfortunately, it has no on play, however. It does get blocker reboot, allowing you to push for some aggression while still getting some good defense going. Vikemon, on the other hand, I think is a truly impactful ace. A lot of cards in the current format really do just want to be deleted, and Vikemon allows you to get around those like pesky protections and deletion effects that I think a lot of decks are really trying to make use of. Comparatively, it also has a pretty solid when attacking effect, allowing you to get rid of memory blockers or just really pesky can't play it by effect floodgates that have been like bugging you throughout the game. And even just hard playing it prevents your opponent from from alliancing you for a game. It prevents you from getting like Fenrir Lugamon OTK'd or Takamikazuchi OTK'd, because they typically need to alliance in order to do that. And if you do the Vikemon ace, they can't do that because it prevents your opponent's Digimon with one or less sources from actually being able to suspend. It's also, I think, one of the most important cards in the Vikemon, not into the Vikemon matchup, into the Royal Knight matchup, as just cycling your Vikemon off of your Omnizort, because Omnizort does play out levels 8 cost or less play cost, purple or black Digimon, which all of your aces will end up invariably meeting. Being able to play this guy out over and over and over again prevents your opponent from actually being able to OTK you at any given point, because the Digimon will never have sources underneath them, or at least never have more than one source underneath them. And then on the crackback, he'll be able to start picking off their really threatening bodies. The only matchup I think all of these aces do not cover effectively is unfortunately Demon Lords. Demon Lords is a truly difficult matchup for us that we cannot just play around as effectively as I would like. But that's okay. That's it for the level 6s. I think it's a truly comprehensive suite of cards that let us deal with a majority of decks in the format, should things go at least somewhat our way, which I don't think is asking for a lot when the game doesn't feel as fast as the prior format. I know that may sound weird. I think that Shoto just really truly slows down a lot of our opponents for us enough that we can find the pieces that we need in order to make the game kind of turn tide into our favor. But enough slobbing on our level 6s. Let's move on to our level 7s. We got 7 of them things, so let's talk about them. So, we'll do the Omnizort first, because even though Apocalypse is technically the archetypical Digimon for the deck, I think Omnizort plays a more pivotal role in every single matchup. So, Omnizort, when Digivolving off of black or purple for 6, you can play out you'd mill 3, and then you can play out 2 Digimon with an 8 cost, with 8 costs or less that are black and purple, or black or purple. This lets you get out any of your aces, including a blocker for Mega Gargo, getting a Vikemon effect, getting the Grand Kuwagamon effect, or even just getting out a purple body, should you really need one with the Melga. But typically, if you're just going for the purple body here, ideally, you'll probably want one of your other lovely level 5s, be it forcing your opponent to attack the Edamon, getting some extra searching and then bodies in the back with the Lady Devies, even just placing out a Mephisto just to try and prevent your board from getting deleted in a meaningful way, or Wisebon, again, similar to Mega Gargo, but this one also searches and gives you potential blocker, should your opponent play into it. It also has the slight upside of when attacking, you can place the Digimon, a level 6 Digimon from underneath this card's sources back to your hand to delete one of your opponent's 12 play cost or less unsuspended Digimon. And that is nice, though that effect doesn't normally come up, especially because of the fact that we will typically be deleting this guy off of one of the archetypical level 5s that we play out using its own effect. Though that isn't always necessarily the case. And even though sometimes you'll have an ace underneath, I mean, just sometimes getting the ace back into rotation, into your hand as a known threat that your opponent has to pay some respects to can be nice for mental pressure as well on your opponent. This card is super, super important. I would say only slightly behind one of the level 5s is this card in importance for finding in your opening hand. It's him and Shoto are probably on equal playing field, but you want multiple copies of Zort. You only really need one copy of Shoto for a majority of games. There are obviously games where multiple Shotos allowing you to get multiple Mother D Reapers, or even giving some of your other Digimon blocker is more impactful. But a majority of the time you want to see 2 to 3 copies of this Zwart throughout the game. Moving on to our Apocalypse. Playing this at 1, this card is just really nice to have. At some point in the game, you'll be able to play it for 3, typically. And you can play it in 2 different manners. The first being a recycler for one of your strong aces. A lot of the games I typically play, I'll just play it out for 3 and place a Vikemon immediately underneath it, understanding that it'll get deleted. But valuing the Vikemon effect to try and stall my opponent again for that extra turn. And even since it costs so cheap at 3, I can maybe even play out a level 5 alongside that, forcing my opponent to answer a lot more than they normally would have had to. And essentially saying, hey, I'm going to mill 8 cards from you right now, and next turn it's going to be 10 unless you out this guy immediately. Which is super, super good. I really, really do think this card is very impactful just as a threat, and as a means of toolboxing a level 6 effect back into play, be it one of your Dark Masters or one of your strong aces, or even getting like a Searcher going can be completely fine. However, this card actually has a secondary utility against certain matchups. As I mentioned, Demon Lord is a pretty difficult matchup. This card actually is one of our most opportune ways of dealing with the deck, purely because of the fact they are milling so much off of our level 6s, because Creepymon allows them to mill a card for each level they deleted off the Digimon, which will typically be 6. So they're milling probably around 12 to 18 cards over the course of a game pretty consistently. And if they haven't found their pieces by then, they're going to have to keep milling over and over and over again. And should that happen, at any point your opponent has 8 or less cards, Apocalypse is immediately lethal. And if your opponent doesn't recognize that fact or play around it, they will lose. Which is why, even though Paladin mode sometimes sees super good success against the deck, a lot of times I tend to play for the Apocalypse out should I find it reasonably early. Aside from that, there's not much really to say. Apocalypse isn't the main game plan of the deck. It's just a nice utility card that synergizes very well with some of the other pieces that we have, as well as making our Mephistomons cheaper. Moving on to our final level 7, we've got Imperial Digimon Paladin Mode Ace. This card is truly fantastic. It is an absolute game changer of what this deck is able to do, because it makes your Dark Master, specifically your Metal Stage 1, threats. It makes your Vikemons threats. It makes your Grand Koagamons threats, and it makes your Mega Gargomons threats. No longer are you just able to swing into a board of level 6s that has no blocker and truly feel safe doing so, which I think is fantastic as a means of making it so that way our, again, versatility is the most powerful thing in this deck. Being able to have a versatile toolbox and keep your opponent on their toes for what they really need to be playing around at any given moment, as well as having that toolbox that allows us to out certain decks. The amount of times that you'll just hard play a Paladin mode against Takamikazuchi to prevent them from being able to kill you in any given turn is pretty consistent. Being able to Paladin mode to recycle your trash back into your deck, preventing your opponent from killing, from decking you out, happens pretty consistently as well. Being able to steal turn because of how many white level 7s we play. Being able to consistently cycle them with each other, making it so that way we have an endless loop, an endless conga line of assholes, as they say, preventing you from ever truly decking out in any control matchup, making your security control matchup a almost 100% win rate matchup. I don't think there's a single security control deck that will provide enough aggression that you can't answer without them decking out before you, probably. And so as long as you just go for like a 50-minute turn, a 50-minute game 1, you're probably going to end up winning it because of the utility that provides between the Paladin modes and the Apocalypse in those matchups. I think it's truly, truly unmatched. It's also a wonderful OTK tool. Should your opponent not respect it and try to play around, try to swing into you and kill you, having a Paladin mode just kind of set up 2 to 3 swings on its own, and maybe even a Grand Koagamon making them 6 checks by itself, it's devastating. It is a devastating card that can just kill your opponent. The amount of times that I went Vikemon against Royal Knights after they, the turn before they tried to kill me, and they send it anyways, just setting up a huge board, and then I simply go Paladin mode after they give me a huge ton of memory, bottom deck my own trash, gating back 3 memory, playing him for essentially 6 cost, and then, you know, getting like another Vikemon out. is pretty large, but even more so than that, just promoting a Metal Seedramon, Digivolving on top of it for 6, gaining back 3, so Digivolve on top of him for essentially 3, and then just swinging in for game is huge. It's huge. It's so powerful. It's so good. I love it. Fantastic. Fantastic. I would not play this at any less than 2. 3 is a little bit more questionable because, again, he's not so impactful. It really requires you to have other cards on board to make use of him, rather than just him being insane by himself. But that's it for the regular Digimon. Moving on to our egg for Mother D Reaper. This hasn't changed, though the reasons that we're playing it have only increased. Speaking of the reasons we've played it, now are increased, the Shoto. So for those of you who don't know, it's a 3 mana, or 3 memory card that just says, start your main phase. If your opponent has a Digimon, gain a memory. As well as you can give one of your Digimon blocker, and I think it's reboot. Let's see. Shoto. He specifically says, end of your turn, by spending this Tamer, one of your Digimon gains piercing and blocker, while this starting main gain memory. So my apologies, it gets blocker at the end of your turn, which is even better if play around cards like the Garurumon Ace, which is huge. But nonetheless, I digress. This card is so good because if you're able to figure out what your opponent is on relatively quickly, just going like a Searcher and then a Mother D Reaper in the back, and then you promote your Mother D Reaper on the next turn, knowing that your opponent is on, like, say, Ancient Garurumon, and they played out a Tamer and like a rookie and a rookie in the back, and they passed you like 1 memory. You would promote the Mother D Reaper, and then you would just play the Shoto. You would delete your level 5, placing your Dark Masters in the back, preferably a Piedmon or a Machinedramon, since you have an Omnizord in hand, obviously, and then you would give blocker to the Mother D Reaper. If they don't have the right Koji, the one that prevents you from redirecting, the only thing they can do, really, is promote the Ancient Garurumon. Or, I mean, they can't even do the Kendo play, because what would happen is, if you don't put them, so let's say they put us to 1, which would be ideal for them, we put them to 2, even if they go to 3 memory, off of the Memory Starter Koji, they would then Digivolve for 2, they would swing, Digivolve for free, and then Digivolve for 3 into Ancient Garurumon. We would just block. They wouldn't get the Anga effect because there's nothing for them to bounce, and because they never checked security, they also don't get the Anga effect off the Koromons from the rookies, meaning they have to play the whole turn completely differently, which is huge, because that's already making your opponent having to think more, and in a long game against a versatile deck like this, it leaves your opponent prone to making more mistakes, which I think is truly, truly impactful. This deck allows your opponent to make so many mistakes against you, which is so very, I think, game determinative a lot of times, of your opponent just makes a single mistake and all of a sudden you snowball out of control and you win from there. Having multiple copies of Shoto isn't necessarily bad either, which is why I'm so comfortable playing it at 4. It is, I think, as important in certain matchups as Omnizord, and in other matchups, it is probably more important than your level 5s. As insane as that sounds, against certain decks, you really just need the defense to hold you through getting your board online and getting your tempo online and being able to survive a little bit more. I think playing these 2 level 5s, this Omnizord and this Shoto at any less than 4 copies each is a mistake in at least this style of the deck that I've decided to go down. Moving on to our final Tamer, we got 2 Analog Youth. I've kind of bounced around between Digimon Emperor as a means of slowing down a couple more of the aggressive rushing decks in the Analog Youth here. And I eventually settled on the Analog Youth because it has some utility in the fact that if your opponent ends up deleting one of your aces that has sources underneath it, because you just ace that turn, you can at least suspend the Analog Youth to mitigate some of the damage, but more importantly, get another D Reaper out for your Shoto on the next turn, giving you even more potential blockers on the crackback, which is really, really good. But also, it searches and sets up your trash, which is something that this deck truly does appreciate as well. Being able to get some of your level 5s in trash, or even just finding some of them so you can add them to hand, feels really good. As well as finding key pieces like your Omnizord, or even some of your specific aces that are really good in this specific matchup, is really, really nice. Unfortunately, it does mill the Shotos, but there's nothing you can really do about that, and you kind of just have to accept it for what it is. I want to play this at 4 because it's such a good card. Unfortunately, I cannot think of a single card in this deck that I want to cut, besides maybe a copy of Grand Kawaga, and even then, I think that decreases the quality of our purple ace pool by an extent that I'm not necessarily comfortable with. Of course, this is all me talking before I've taken this to a decently sized tournament. I will be taking this, as mentioned before, tomorrow, 5 p.m. EST, streamed at twitch.tv Marshmallow Ruffian. Please come, watch, enjoy, talk, interact, etc., etc. I would truly love to see all of you there. Now, onto the cards that I've considered, but I've decided to cut. Starting from left to right, we've got Raiji Ludamon. Now, for those of you who don't know, Raiji Ludamon is a card that functions very similarly to the Edamon that we mentioned prior. Where is he at? There we go. It's just a hand effect by paying 2 costs and placing this card underneath one of your Legend Arms or level 5 Digimon as its bottom Digivolution card. One of your opponent's Digimon gains until the end of their turn. This Digimon attacks at the start of the main phase, which is really good. Its other effect doesn't matter. The your turn effect that will never, ever, 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 ever come up, ever, ever. Don't even imagine, oh, what if I play 2 and then I get one out off of the Zwart and then I still have memory? I can place another Raiji underneath. No. Okay, that's not a realistic thing. That's Disneyland, alright? We're working in reality right now. Now, this card is objectively worse, just off of its main effects, than the Edamon. It's a monocolor, so you can't even make use of powerful aces like the Valkyrie one. But more importantly, it requires you to have a body on field already without passing turn. So you have to play out at level 5 or have one on field already, still keeping your turn, which is a lot harder to do rather than just hard playing the Edamon. And even though you can play it off the Zord, it literally does nothing other than just be a body if you do play it off with the Zord. The only good thing that it has over the Edamon, which is something that I've pondered a lot about, is the fact that it's inheritable. It's all turns once per turn when this Digimon would be deleted, other than by one of your effects, by trashing one card with the Legend of Arms trait from this Digimon's card to prevent that deletion, which includes itself. So it's essentially protection for the card that you would go into, making this that way your ace has to be deleted more than once, which is super, super nice. Unfortunately, it doesn't protect you from Ancient Garurumon, which is, I think, one of the more impactful matchups that you would really want this card in. As well as, there are just certain ways that this interacts with certain decks, such as Demon Lords being able to Digivolve you now, that I just don't appreciate at all. So overarchingly, I decided to cut it just because I think it was too much of a pipe dream to actually make consistently happen. Moving back in, with Scorpio and Cherrymon. Both of these are archetypal searchers for our Dark Masters and level 6s that we really care about a lot. Unfortunately, Cherrymon's green, and are some good green aces. As we mentioned, there's Grand Kawagamon as well as Mega Gargo, but I think it's not worth it purely because of the fact that you cannot play it out off of the Zort, making it a worse version of both of your other level 5 searchers, the Gigadramon and the Lady Devimon. And since all 3 of their inheritables are pretty mediocre for the deck, it doesn't even stand out in that sense. Speaking of inheritables, but this one, however, not being mediocre, Scorpiomon gives blocker, which is insane. Unfortunately, it's blue, so it's bad. It can only be used with the Vikemon, and that's never a great spot to be in, because your opponent will always just be like, okay, well, they have an ace for this guy, it's going to be Vikemon. And that's so telegraphed that it's just really bad. And you can never play it off of the Zort either, so you're always having to try and just hard Digivolve something on top of it. So it's Metal Seedramon or Vikemon. And that's it. And if you're going Metal Seedramon, why? You already have blocker of Metal Seedramon. There are so many better ways to utilize it rather than just getting it off of the level 5, but so that's why, unfortunately, I've decided to cut any copies of those 2 cards. Another archetypal card that I've decided to play 0 copies of is Puppetmon. Pokemon has an insanely strong on-play when attacking effect. In fact, I think it's probably the strongest on-play effect of any of the Dark Masters in the current meta. However, is inheritable, as mentioned, the green inheritable is bad. It's just piercing, which isn't great. You never really wanting to be piercing with your Paladin mode or your Apocalypse. And it's also the most telegraphed Dark Master. So when I said it has the best on-play, I meant it has the best on-play. It has one of the worst when attacking effects. Because if you place this card in the back, your opponent's just not going to swing. And then you get to make the decision of, do you promote your Puppetmon? And just get 0 value out of it? Because now what's going to happen? You leave it out, okay, you're telegraphing, it's the most obvious Paladin mode in the world. So your opponent just needs to play around that. It's just bad. You can't go on top of it with Zwart either, which makes it so that way you're not able to actually make use of tempo plays. And while Metal Seedramon is in the same boat, at least that card has a good inheritable, which I think really makes it stand out comparatively. Which is why I've decided to cut this card. I don't think a Pokemon is worth getting up earlier when it comes to having to play a copy of this card. On to a really interesting tech card that I've played around a lot with, the Leviamon. Sec +1 is really nice, as well as the on-play, being able to delete 2 of your opponent's Digimon, making it a 13 cost that gains 2 memory typically, which is really, really good. But it also has the same synergy, as mentioned, with things like Mephistomon, which your opponent typically wants to leave up. If you just hardplay Mephistomon, they typically won't delete it, then you have to out it in some other way. So obviously certain matchups can really easily, and other matchups can't really easily. If they choose to leave it up, on the crackback you can just go straight into Leviamon and make a huge swing turn with it. Give me a second of a drink. As well as it continuously gets the on all turns effect that when opposed Digimon is deleted, gain a memory. I think overarchingly it's an insanely strong card. However, unfortunately, it's just a bit too clunky, I think, to see a consistent use in the deck. As well as with how tight the deck list is, I just couldn't justify playing a copy of it. Or more than that even. So, there may be a format in the future where this card sees consistent play in our deck, but until that point, I think that playing it feels pretty bad. Especially because of how many decks right now have protection or don't even end on bodies. It just doesn't feel great. And then finally, we have a duo card combo, the Mega Digimon Assembly and the Ultimate Chaosmon. Those of you that may not know what these two cards do, essentially this one I can ignore the color requirements if my opponent has a level 6 or higher Digimon, which, spoiler, in this meta your opponents typically don't, which is not great. We used to get around that fact by the fact that we played around 4 analog use and at least 2 Digimon Emperors, but because of the way the deck is looking now, it really does rely on your opponent to end on level 6, and as mentioned, they'll end on like a level 5 with Pyldramon or maybe a Dragon mode. They'll end up on nothing and just some Tamers with the Ancient Garurumon. They'll end up on the level 5 that's like gonna force you to swing and dex. Like, you're just never really happy with it. And even the decks that end on level 6s, such as Demon Lords, what does Ultimate Chaosmon really do? Well, when Digivolving, if DNA Digivolving, you can place 2 more Digimon from your trash underneath this card, and then you can bottom deck up to 1 card for every level 6 in this Digimon's sources, which is really good because you can get 4 bottom decks. And then it also has Security Attack +3 and Piercing on your turn if you have 4 more sources, which is really gross, as well as Partition for Yellow, Black, and Green, Purple, meaning that the strong aces you place underneath, like the Vaikamon, or like the Grand Kuwaga, or the Melga, or even your powerful on-play effects from your Dark Masters can be activated again with relative ease. All of this is to say this card on paper is insanely good, and in practice has seen, I think, insane swing turns as well as insane kill turns. Killing my opponent from 5 security is not a pipe dream. However, I think it's really bad in this current meta. Unfortunately, Imperial Dramon has two effective ways of dealing with this card. First being Partition, meaning that even if you bottom deck their Pyodramon, they still keep the bodies on field, which isn't great. But second is the fact that they have Source Strip. So if they strip one of your Partition sources, your guy's kind of just a dingus, and those sources tend to be aces, meaning they can take turn or even gain extra memory quite easily. Against decks, I mean, yes, bottom decking is truly devastating against that deck, and I think that's where this card has the most application. But even then, they have Digivolve in their archetype. If they just Digivolve your Ultimate Chaosmon twice, they're typically getting rid of an ace, because those are the easiest ones to get under as the first card, typically. Though, not necessarily all the time. Just speaking from personal experience, typically it is an ace card that is on top, like your Vicomon. And then they just get extra memory. You don't have Partition anymore. You're a very weak level 6 body that probably doesn't have much utility going for it anymore. That doesn't feel great. Against your Ancient Garurumon, they don't have much to bottom deck. Like, sure, you can bottom deck some rookies, and that's, like, really annoying, but that doesn't deal with the main problem that your opponent's really trying to do, which is Ancient Garurumon you over and over and over from the back with Tamers. I think this card's really good. I just don't think in this current format it's actually that useful, which is something that you really need to kind of keep in mind. But that's it for the cards that I've at least considered and tested out that I think have some value. Obviously, I've tested other insane cards like the yellow-black Chaosmon or the evil black and yellow Seraphimon. Tested out a lot of different ways of dealing with my opponents, and I think these ones are the most reasonable adds, while still being not good enough to make what, in my opinion, is the best list I could make without any, I think, ideal testing. This list will probably change coming tomorrow, and you can see that change in real time at twitch.tv/Marshmallow Ruffian. Please come watch, say hi, anything. 5 p.m. EST, I know I mentioned it before. But if you can't make it, don't worry. I read my comments, I promise you. I haven't responded to comments in like a week just because I've been pretty busy with stuff. I'm fixing that again. Don't worry, I'm gonna start responding to a majority of my comments. Once again, please leave a comment. Any suggestions would truly help. And I wish you guys a wonderful rest of your day.